So today we'll be talking about Chapter 22, Section 3, and that is Hoover struggles with the Great Depression. President Herbert Hoover was a textbook conservative, especially in the way that he handled the Great Depression. And though this is straight from the textbook of a small government approach to an economic crisis, it drew large criticism from most Americans, leading to a major political overturn. You could call it an upheaval, you could call it a political revolution. Nonetheless, it's a huge turnover where the Democrats took control of the House during his administration. FDR was elected. We go from an extreme conservative response to an extreme liberal response. And so let's look at the two approaches. We'll start with conservative today. First off, Herbert Hoover told the Americans that our economy was on sound footing, that depressions, recessions, and boom cycles are part of the natural flow of an economy. This has been evidenced with the burst of the tech bubble in the early 2000s, when the dot-com era came to an end. It could be looked at by seeing the steady incline or steady increase of our economy through the 90s. It could be evidenced by the roaring 20s, by the steady growth of wages, by the steady growth of gross domestic product, and then the decline. And so he, citing economists, would point out this is natural. And he believed, as did the Republican Party, that it was not the purpose of the government to meddle in the economy. In fact, Calvin Coolidge said it well: the business of America is business. That a government exists not to control an economy, but to foster cooperation between competing groups. Meaning, it is private business, privately regulated, free market, unhindered by government regulation. That's conservative economics. That when it comes to the social welfare of the people themselves, the conservatives believe that people should take care of their own families and not be reliant on the government. Classic example, in Mississippi, when they experienced a great flood in the 1920s, a great flood, the equivalent of Katrina, New Orleans underwater, people displaced, homes destroyed. Calvin Coolidge, what did he tell them? Forget it. It is not the government's job. In fact, he said, and I quote, "The government is not an insurance broker to the poor." He believed it was not the government's job to bail them out. And we're going to look at other examples of that related to the Great Depression today. He called it rugged individualism. That you stand or you fall on your own merit. So he took pride in that. And again, this is conservative economic theory still today, that you stand or fall on your own merit. And that's one way of looking at things. So what does this mean practically? So Hoover took very cautious steps in approaching the economic crisis our country was facing. For one, he called a meeting of business and banking and labor leaders to sit down together and discuss and attempt to solve these problems. He believed it was the government's job to facilitate conversation, facilitate community involvement with private entities. He created, in fact, an organization for private groups to raise charitable funds to help people. So he's not looking at this from a cold-hearted perspective saying, "Oh, you're starving, well, that sucks to be you." He's simply saying it is not outlined in the Constitution that the government should take an active role in the social welfare of its own citizens. And to be fair, if you look at the preamble, that's not one of the 6 outlined purposes of our government, according to the preamble. So that's where he's basing that theory. And so he created an organization to foster private cooperation in helping alleviate the suffering of American people. One of his great successes in this facet is Boulder Dam, more popularly known as Hoover Dam. It was named after him because of his enormous success. The amazing thing about this dam, it was the largest dam in the world for its time. Generates a large amount of electricity, holds in reservoir scarce water resources in an arid region, controlling flooding, but also distributing water to a place that would be desert otherwise. There would be no Las Vegas without Hoover Dam. But what's amazing about it is he was able to do this without spending taxpayer dollars. Hoover Dam was built through private investment, and Hoover facilitated that private investment. It created thousands of jobs, generates lots of revenue, and is today still an important control of that precious resource in an arid region. Provides electricity enough to power Las Vegas, provides flood control, and then finally water to places that desperately need it.
Frank Crowe is driving ahead the building of the Hoover Dam, the biggest engineering project America has ever seen. He's driving his men hard. The crews work day and night. A sea of concrete rises in the canyon as broad as 2 football fields laid end to end. 5,000 men, 50,000 machines and tools, the best engineers alive. Enough material to fill a train over 1,500 kilometers long. This is the 1930s equivalent of putting a man on the moon. Almost 6 million tons of concrete have to be poured. That's enough to lay a meter-wide pavement around the world. But how do you pour that much concrete and get it where it's needed? Frank Crowe designs the most sophisticated cable system ever built. Giant bottom-opening buckets. They pour the concrete into molds, exactly where it's wanted. Concrete was invented by the Romans 2,000 years ago. But the Hoover Dam is the first large concrete dam in history. Today, virtually all dams are made of concrete. It's malleable and it's strong. It's the world's favorite building material for any structure. Frank is up against the clock, and he has a big problem. The drying concrete generates heat. If the dam were constructed in a single continuous pour, it would put out enough heat to bake 500,000 loaves of bread every day for 3 years. But worse, the dam would take 125 years to harden. Frank Crowe's got no time for that.
Backs against the wall, we figured out who we were. We worked our way out of that depression.
The secret of cooling the concrete lies within the dam itself. 937 kilometers of 2.5 centimeter pipe carry ice-cold water from the very river the dam is taming.
No one had ever thought of this before, and those pipes are still in the Hoover Dam today.
Frank Hurry Up Crowe lives up to his name. The Hoover Dam is completed on September 30th, 1935, 2 years ahead of schedule. Frank receives a bonus worth over $4 million in today's money.
For those workers to have built something as monumental and as challenging as Hoover Dam was an astonishing feat of construction. And I think it gave us all a sense of the possible.
It's 1936, and the Hoover Dam is the largest hydroelectric power producing facility in the world. Each of the 17 generators weighs more than 4 jumbo jets. Together, they can supply power to 750,000 people in booming cities like Los Angeles. The dam creates Lake Mead. At over 600 square kilometers, it is the biggest reservoir in America. It helps California produce more food for America than any other state. The Hoover Dam workers make something else boom as well. A little town 50 kilometers away where they go to drink and gamble. Its name, Las Vegas. As the wife of one Hoover Dam worker puts it,
when men worked in such dangerous surroundings, you couldn't blame a lot of fellows for sort of letting their hair down. They were having fun.
In 1930, just 5,000 people live in Las Vegas. Then the dam workers arrive. Then the tourists arrive. Then the gambling. Now over 37 million people come every year to party in Las Vegas. After 70 years, the Hoover Dam still supplies power to the states of Nevada, Arizona, and California. One Las Vegas hotel has the biggest flashlight on Earth, 40 billion candle power. You can read a newspaper 16 kilometers out in space by its light.
So the Hoover Dam, one of the great successes.
How many people died during the building of that?
I have no idea how many people died during the building of the dam. I imagine several would have. For example, quite a few folks died in the digging of the Panama Canal, mainly because in a tropical area, malaria is a huge concern. Yellow fever, cholera, things you have to deal with in tropical areas. Around on the Colorado River where this is built, you're dealing with desert conditions. And that creates its own logistical challenges. Number one, how to get enough potable water to the workers, how to deal with droughts, dust storms. But I don't know, so you may want to look that up and let us know. Hoover Dam is one of those great successes in that he was able to do this through private investment. But unfortunately, that's not enough. The building of the dam created hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs. But that's not enough. We're dealing with 25% of Americans out of work. Those who had jobs were underemployed. And as economic problems increased, people turned against the Republican Party. The party that they had supported through the boom times of the 1920s was now blamed for the economic problems facing our country. The Democrats took control of the House in the midterm elections in 1930. The Republicans managed to hold on to a one-vote majority in the Senate. So enough to prevent a two-thirds supermajority, but not enough to get anything done. And so when you see this type of situation, which is what we have now, where the legislative and the executive are controlled by two different parties, it can result in what's called a lame duck Congress, where nothing gets done. And that's the situation we're in now. Meanwhile, farmers have been beset by falling crop prices. Farmer cooperatives around the nation agreed to create artificial food shortages to raise the price of crops. The irony here that John Steinbeck points out in Grapes of Wrath is that farmers were literally dumping crops into rivers, and guards were posted to keep people from stealing them. And so there were real situations where food was being destroyed while people were starving, which Steinbeck points out is pretty messed up. Meanwhile, people are homeless. 300,000 hobos, millions more have been displaced. And so people started calling their shanty towns Hoovervilles in criticism of the president. There are a few examples of the conservatives taking direct action here. No conservative is purely, only, ever conservative. Same with liberals. There's no purist in these regards. People have to be willing to compromise. Small government people have to be willing to take direct action in some circumstances. So Hoover was able to negotiate agreements among private entities. That was one of his big successes. He supported private organizations like the Federal Farm Board. That was a group of farming collectives. And they agreed to buy up excess crops as a group and to hold them until market prices rose. He was able to get large banks, private large banks, to establish a national credit corporation. That is for large banks to merge, to pool resources, etc. But next, the direct action I was speaking of. Two examples of this are the Federal Home Loan Bank Act, which lowered mortgage rates, trying to encourage people to buy new homes to bolster the home construction and real estate market. Also, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. This was created to provide emergency funds for businesses, to keep private businesses afloat by providing emergency loans. So these were two examples of direct action taken by the Republican president. The trouble with this, and where people distance themselves from the Republican Party politically, is we're dealing with a crisis, an economic crisis. And what we have to remember is what else is going on around the world, is that this depression is being felt around the world. We're lucky that we're a nation rich in resources. We're lucky that we were a wealthy enough nation to be able to create programs like the New Deal, offering millions of jobs, rebuilding infrastructure. Some countries collapsed. Germany turned to fascism, so did Italy. Russia's experiencing civil wars in its transition to communism. Places around the world are collapsing. In fact, immediately following the Second World War, we would be bailing out a number of countries, including Greece and Turkey, that were on the verge of complete collapse of their economic system. So we're lucky that we're a nation rich in resources. Everyone else was not so lucky. But even though we came out of this okay, that was 11 years after the crash. 11 years of suffering, 11 years of 25% unemployment. So how do we address it? The point that the American public discovered is small government wasn't working. Another tragic example is the story of the Bonus Army. World War I veterans marched on Washington, D.C. in 1932, asking for the President's support of the Patman Bill. The Patman Bill was going to provide immediate payment for bonuses that had been promised to veterans of the First World War. The Republican-controlled Senate voted down the bill that the House had introduced. The President opposed the bill, and so he made it clear it wasn't going to get past his desk. And then he told the veterans to leave. However, about 2,000 stayed, demanding to speak with Hoover himself. The President sent out the U.S. Army to disband the Bonus Army. He sent American troops against aging veterans. Tear gas was fired into the crowd, injuring men, women, and children. I'm going to show you footage of this. Someday when you get to go to D.C. and you stand at the Lincoln Memorial, you'll think about Martin Luther King and his famous I Have a Dream speech. And it's one of those wonderful moments when you get to stand there and think about that. But I want you to also think about all of these other dark times. I want you to think of the Bonus Army and the fact that there was a time in American history where veterans asked our government to treat them with decency, and the President responded by calling troops and shooting tear gas into a peaceful crowd of veteran protesters, demanding fair payment for what had been promised to them.
In 1932, Washington was under siege. The capital was surrounded by over 10,000 unemployed veterans of World War I from all over the country. Their only assets were the bonus certificates they'd been given after the war, which promised a cash bonus sometime in the future. They needed it now.
I came to Washington to get my bonus, and I'm going to wait for it till I get it if I have to wait till 1945.
What that brought you to Washington?
Well, to beat the Undertaker, spend the money before the Undertaker gets it.
I know who's made this country worth living in. It's just you fellas. Look, makes me so damn mad a whole lot of people speak of you as tramps. By God, they didn't speak of you as tramps in 1917 and 18. No. Take it from me, this is the greatest demonstration of Americanism we've ever had. Pure Americanism.
President Hoover was left to deal with the veterans when the Senate rejected their demands. The marchers had stayed, camped out in central Washington.
It's war, the greatest concentration of fighting troops in Washington since 1865.
I knew something was going to happen, that they might be attacked. And I had a press card, so I passed the police lines, and then I saw the soldiers advancing into the camp. And when confronted with this, the men all stood there and said, "Stand firm as long as you can." And they started throwing tear gas. I'd never seen anything like it. They systematically went down the line, burned up all the tents and all the possessions of the people there. I was thinking of Herbert Hoover when this happened, because his election was in 3 months. I thought this would be the finish of Hoover.
The orders of the president must be obeyed, and the roaring flames sound the death knell to the fantastic Bonus Army in the shadow of the beautiful dome of the Capitol of the United States of America.